What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And this week, since we did not get any changes to the Pioneer format, I think one of the best decks to look at is probably the most popular one, and another one that we will probably continue to revisit as long as there are no changes to the Pioneer format. And all in due part to one very powerful card that is continuing to see play in Modern as well as Pioneer and being clamored for bans among the player base. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the Rakdos Midrange and really dig into it and see why this deck is so good and why it commands so much of a share of the Pioneer metagame. So here we have the Rakdos midrange deck piloted by, I'm going to assume that's Jakob Pablo. At least I'm just going to assume that's how it's pronounced. Butchering aside, this deck won the Pioneer Challenge going 7-0 in the Swiss and, of course, 3-0 in top 8. So a nice 10-0 finish. Congratulations to them. Before we get too deep into this deck, though, I would like to formally invite you to subscribe to the channel as well as ring the notification bell. Helps me out a lot. Continues to grow the channel, trying to reach 100 subscribers by the end of the year, and we are oh so close. So help us get over that hump and get into the triple digits just by subscribing. Of course, I post videos like this all the time on Pioneer and Modern, as well as some discussion videos as well. There's also a link in the description to the Discord server. Go ahead and follow that link, join it, talk about Magic. It's great, great, wonderful time. We can talk about decks like this. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at Rakdos midrange here. Typical of mid-range deck fashion. All right, we're playing 4 Thoughtseize in this deck. The questionable card in question, of course, is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This card is proving to be a multi-format all-star. I mean, people are playing it in Standard, obviously. They are continuing to play it in Pioneer, a card that people want to see banned in Pioneer even. And on top of that is also worthy of seeing Modern play and some of the other like red based decks in the format. So this card really kind of brings it all together. The fact that it makes a 2/2 that can attack to make a treasure token is kind of a way that you can ramp if your opponent doesn't get rid of it, and continue to ramp if they just are content with taking 2 and not dealing with the Goblin Shaman. The second chapter giving you the opportunity to discard up to 2 cards, and if you do draw that many cards, you can just get rid of like redundant lands. You can get rid of spells that are maybe not impactful in the matchup, and just hopefully draw lands or dig through more of your deck. This card does a lot for 3 mana. On top of it, getting to turn into a Kiki Jiki on the other side to make tokens that are copying non-legendary creatures. Notable non-legendary creatures being like Blood Tithe Harvester, which can make you a blood token that you could use to like cycle away other cards later. Also, just getting to be a removal spell on its own. Copy the first Blood Tithe Harvester. That one that you just created can then give something -4/-4. The third one that you create can give it -6/-6, so on and so on. It just gets so big that eventually it just gets to copy removal spells. And of course, those blood tokens then can cash in for other cards later. You have cards like Tenacious Underdog, which aren't necessarily like very good to copy with the Fable and Mirror Breaker, but it is one of those creatures, only a one of. But the fact that you get to pay 4 mana, pay 2 life, and essentially get to do it from the graveyard, it always gives you constant pressure as well as getting to draw a card later after you blitz said card. You have Bone Crusher Giant that you know is just a big body. It can close out a game relatively quickly on its own. Your opponent is de-incentivized to kill it because of its ability when it becomes targeted by a spell. Also, just having the utility on the actual physical card to just be a 2 damage spell that cannot be prevented. Graveyard Trespasser, just getting to eat cards from your opponent's graveyard or even your own graveyard to drain your opponent. And of course, just being very hard in itself to remove by basically auto 2-for-1ing your opponent. Aside from that, like we have cards like Shieldred, the Apocalypse, and Kalidas, and Kroxa. These are the legendary creatures in the deck, but they do give you something for their mana cost. Kroxa, in the early game, just 2 mana, just essentially getting to make your opponent like discard a card of their choice. Not too bad. Maybe you get some damage, or you just hit a spell. Either one's pretty good for you. And in the late game, just a 6/6 that is going to constantly put pressure on your opponent. They are forced to keep a card in hand so they don't lose life, but if they choose to play those cards to try to beat the Crocs in the late game, then they're inevitably going to end up losing life and having a very hard time dealing with the Crocs because there's not much in the format that is bigger than Croxa, especially for the efficiency of it, that this deck would not be able to handle in the late term. So like Croxa definitely can be a knockout in the Pioneer format. You have Kalitas, which kind of just destroys like some of the creature-based decks. Like you are fine with getting in this match of just playing creatures to the board. Kalitas making like your fatal pushes, your braids, dreadbores, even like your Lily minuses and things like that, and other removal spells. Very good because you just get to make zombies, and then you can cash those zombies in to put counters on Kalitas, and just being a like even a 5/6 lifelink Kalitas is very hard to beat just in terms of like trying to race it, and then of course like trying to get rid of it with like damage based removal is very difficult, and Kalitas is a very hard card to deal with, and especially if you are playing against a creature deck kind of like mono white and things like that, it just kind of folds to Kalitas because it is that powerful. Shieldred, while on the opposite side of it, where Kalitas can kind of get aggressive, you really don't care to be aggressive with Shieldred. The fact that she just gets to sit on the battlefield and is very hard to attack into because most of the time it's going to be bigger than a lot of the creatures that are going to be getting in the red zone. And even if it doesn't, you can just cash it in to kind of trade in the very worst case. Obviously if you have like the other Shieldred or something like that. But the fact that this just gets to sit, play, whenever you draw a card, you get to gain life, which again makes it a little bit more difficult for the aggressive decks to try and beat you in that sense, because every time you're drawing a card, you're going to gain life. And whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. So they just can't sit back and just kind of like get in this holding pattern of like draw, go, because your opponent is also going to lose life as well for each card they draw. It plays pretty well against like blue white, because even though like blue white might have some other spells and stuff to get rid of Shieldred, if they have to try to draw their way out of it, they can lose upwards of 8 life. And Shieldred has already done her job of just dealing a ton of damage to your opponent in that way. Um, Shieldred just kind of wraps it all up together, and just being this very powerful card in this deck on the top end of 4 mana is very good. I mean, this card was very underrated, I think, when it was spoiled in Dominaria United, and has proven it's worth its weight in the price tag for sure, and being probably one of the best cards in this black red deck, at least one of the best additions to this black red deck. And that's saying a lot when we have the other card that is a new addition to this deck in Liliana of the Veil. As a one of, I believe there's another one of in the sideboard. Liliana is a very powerful planeswalker. Has been for its entirety of when it was originally printed in standard and Innistrad, when it was in modern, it being at least a top 2 or top 3 planeswalker. It probably wasn't number 3 or even number 2 in some cases. Arguably one of the best planeswalkers in the modern format, at least at some point in its existence. Just getting to edict your opponent to get rid of some other harder to deal with creatures, and an ultimate that doesn't necessarily win you the game like some ultimates do, but one that can make it very, very, very difficult for your opponent to win from that spot. So a planeswalker that can kind of do it all. Obviously, not one of the most important things because it is harder in this deck to leverage the discard of Liliana of the Veil. But Liliana of the Veil never really needed her discard leverage to be the planeswalker that she was in past and present. So definitely worth a one of. You could probably sneak as like a second one in here if you wanted to, but obviously this deck went undefeated, so you probably really don't need it. Some of the other spells, you have, of course, the aforementioned 4 Thoughtseize. This is like a staple of like every black deck ever, as long as Thoughtseize has been legal. Thoughtseize is the best discard spell, pound for pound. Obviously, the only other card that I think rivals it in terms of like a discard spell is whatever one that is legacy legal, Cabal Therapy, that one. Just because you have the potential to name name a card that your opponent has 2 of and get rid of it. But Thoughtseize is just getting to give you the information, take the best card, and like the only card that can like really rival it is one that requires like a higher skill ceiling, if you will, to use it that effectively. And it doesn't even matter if your opponent just doesn't even have the card in hand. It has the potential to miss. So high risk, high reward potentially, but Thoughtseize is definitely being a card that is like high reward with minimal risk. of ever really being bad, besides obviously when your opponent has no cards in hand. A Braid, just this versatile, like can be a removal spell, it can be a shatter. Nothing special about it, but definitely gets the job done. Dreadbore, having the flexibility of hitting creatures and planeswalkers, always a plus in this format, where people want to play decks like blue-white control and play other like creature type decks. Of course, we went over the Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, very powerful. The mana base, pretty simple. 4 Blightstep pathway / Seer Step pathway, Black-Red pathway. Of course, it's going to be in this deck. 4 Blood Crypt, of course, it's going to be in this deck. I guess I could say that for like a lot of the lands, but this is a dual land that can come into play untapped basically whenever you need it and give you the colors that you need. Castle Lochthwain and Den of the Bugbear. You have Hive of the Eye Tyrant, Sokenzen, and then you have really kind of Urborg in a way. Den and Hive are just the creature lands from the D&D set. That Hive can just be another card that can eat cards from your opponent's graveyard. Den of the Bugbear, if you activate it multiple times, and same is true for Hive of the Eye Tyrant, that when it attacks, you get to trigger its ability, whatever, multiple times. So definitely something to keep in mind, like in the super late game, where you usually have like 9 lands in play, where you could double activate like Den of the Bugbear and things like that. Castle Lochthwain is a way that this deck can draw extra cards, and of course, like if you draw a card with Castle Lochthwain, up if you just draw up to 2 cards in hand with this card, and you have like a Shieldred in play, it essentially is just a free card draw, and of course just mitigates the number of cards in your hand -2 if you have a Shieldred in play. Even when you don't have a Shieldred in play, just drawing extra cards like Castle Lochthwain in late game when you have no cards in hand is pretty good. Just getting to draw a card and like losing a life has always been great. I mean, that's why like cards like Necropotence and other Phyrexian bullshit or whatever, like Phyrexian Arena and things like that. Not the card I was thinking of, but sort of the same. Has always been good. Castle Lochthwain also very good in those situations. Sokenzen just makes tokens. Can definitely be a good way to kind of like be aggressive, but also play defense to kind of like set up some turns where maybe you want to play like a threat and follow it up with like another one or something like that. Silver Springs, new card printed in the Dominaria United set. Only a one of. Taps for a black or red, but deals a damage to you. Can also tap for a colorless mana to not hurt yourself. Sideboard looks like pretty. I mean, at least to me, pretty stock. You have like your unlicensed hearses, your Hetsugus for like the more aggressive decks, your Witch's Vengeances because they are. It's a cheap sweeper that you can just choose like against like elves and things like that. Extinction Event, just another very cheap mass removal spell. Reckoner, Bank Buster, definitely a way that you can like kind of leverage yourself in like the black red matchups to just hopefully draw extra cards and be able to hit land drops and put pressure on them before they can really put pressure on you. Rending volleys we've seen very popular against like some of the like spirits decks and things like that. Just not a very good way for them to really beat this card. And that's the deck. That is the Rakdos Midrange. This deck is obviously very, very good. And really, the reason why this deck is able to be so good is because it has so many moving parts and so many of the best creatures that you can be playing in the format. Shieldred has already shown to be an all-star in Standard. She is a very, very good card in Pioneer. Hasn't made her way to Modern. Probably won't because I don't foresee games really going on that long, or just having the removal that is present in the format. She is able to be easily dealt with. But in Pioneer, where like the removal is good, but not nearly as good as Modern, she's able to stick around for multiple turns and really just have like an 8-point life swing, by you just getting to draw 2 cards just for your draw step and your opponent drawing 2 cards for their draw step and things like that. Kalidas, of course, just the ultimate hoser for creature decks in this format, because not only being able to kill their creatures with your removal spells or just being able to beat them in combat, you also add to your board as well by making 2/2 zombies. So if it's advantageous for you to go wide, you are able to do so. If you want to load up on the Kalidas and just take out huge chunks of your opponent's life while also gaining huge chunks of life, you can do that as well. A very versatile card in that sense. And Kroxa also just being able to end games very quickly, and that's not to say for any of the other creatures that you're playing in this deck. On top of that, you get to play one of the best one mana black cards in the format in Thoughtseize, followed up by Fatal Push that does eliminate a lot of the format and a lot of the decks that you just kind of want to beat up on when playing this deck, and probably one of the best cards from the Kamigawa set that is not one of these lands, the channel lands, if you will. So all in all, this deck just plays a lot of very good cards, a lot of very efficient cards, relative to like the format. And if gone unchecked, if you don't want to interact with it, then it will just slowly grind you into paste. And if you do try to interact with it, it does kind of just get to interact better, I think, in the early into mid game than some of the other decks. So definitely a good reason why this is one of the best decks in the format. Period. Probably one of the best mid-range decks that you can be playing in the Pioneer format, and a deck that I would not be surprised if it had something banned from it the next time that we had a ban restricted announcement. Of course, avoided it this time around, so I think in that case, Rakdos is going to be in full force and continue to be a very powerful card in the Pioneer format, or a very powerful card, very powerful deck in the Pioneer format. It's been a while. It's been a long day recording. So with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, of course. Comment down below if you play the Rakdos mid-range deck, if you think it sucks, or you just want to talk shit about it. I'm totally fine with it, whatever. Of course, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you enjoy videos like this and you want to see other Pioneer videos, other modern videos, so on and so forth, go ahead, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you know when those videos are posted. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.